What is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity, where for over 16 years we've been bringing you ideological goodness, having conversations with scholars across the disciplines, so you can think, reflect, wrestle, and brew your own faith in today. As part of our current series, Process This Style, on artificial intelligence. We're joined by Noreen Herzfeld, who is a professor of science and religion at St. John's University. She is a computer scientist who had tenure there, then turned theologian to find the resources to wrestle with the questions that were on her mind and in her imagination as an early pioneer in AI research on the technical side. This conversation is quite a bit of fun. She's the author of a brand new book, The Artifice of Intelligence, Divine and Human Relationship in a Robotic Age, along with In Our Image, Artificial Intelligence and the Human Spirit, and a host of other text, articles, and such, exploring the intersection of AI, religion, ethics, and such. And look, this is an amazing conversation. She is first-generation scholar working interdisciplinary, wrestling with AI, and it's a complete honor to have her kicking off this series of conversations, our very first Process This series at Homebrewed Christianity on artificial intelligence. Kester Bruin and I did a little intro in the last episode at Homebrewed of the questions we're bringing in, and you're about to hear over the next 2 months a series of interviews with other scientists and philosophers and ethicists and theologians and lawmakers, and it's going to be it's hopefully going to help us try to bring the best questions into the public square, wrestling with AI, to have the right kind of suspicions and critical hesitations, to know where to put our energy in asking lawmakers to address the right questions, to think about how this technology will impact our neighbor and the planet. And hopefully by bringing together different disciplines and perspectives, all of you that are joining along on the journey will feel a bit more empowered to use your own voice and energy in helping us tackle this question a little better than we have some other technologies when they came on the scene, if you know what I mean. If you want to not just hear the interviews when they come out, but get to hear maybe a little extra in the interviews, get them ad-free, support the podcast and such, then head over to the Process This Substack. We just launched it. All 70-some thousand of you that have been on the Homebrewed email list, we moved over to Substack because it enables us to interact, engage, and such more. So I'd love for you to check that out. There are links on this podcast post and such, or you just type in Process This, Tripp Fuller, or whatever on the internet, and I'm sure it will tell you where to go. But there we'll also be interacting. There's some really cool resources that we're adding along as we move through this series, opportunities to engage and interact and such. So yeah, just check it out. If you want to hang out in person, consider coming to Theology Beer Camp this October 17th and 19th in Denver, Colorado. And you don't just get to hang out with me. Like 500 plus other theology nerd campers with excellent craft beverage selections all included in your ticket. And amazing scholars like Adam Clark is going to be there. Grace G. Sun Kim is going to be there. Brian McLaren, Diana Butler-Bass, Ilya Dilio, John Tatamano, Catherine Keller. Come on, Jorg Rieger's going to be in the house. It's going to be fun. Theologybeer.camp. And hang out with a bunch of nerds, hang out with a bunch of theologians, hang out with a whole bunch of God pods. That's right. Other podcasts that fit in this very clear and distinct category, God pod, that I started using. Anyway, it's awesome. It's awesome. And last thing before we jump in, we have for a long time at Homebrewed have done all these online classes. Like right now we're doing faith and politics for the rest of us. And they're open. Anyone can join them. But for those that are members of the Homebrew community that support it financially, make this whole thing possible, they've had ongoing access to all of the archives of classes. Well, there's like 45 plus of them. Well, we just launched theologyclass.com, which is basically the Homebrewed member site, but on a video learning platform where it's very easy to get access to all the stuff we've done and track it, use it, doesn't require a lot of technological know-how. So if you are a Homebrewed member and haven't switched over, then reach out to us. Just respond to any of our emails. If you'd like to support and you're like, wow, it's really easy now and I get access to all this, yeah, go to theologyclass.com and boom shakalaka. You can get access to all those classes, and you'll get with it, you'll get a coupon for like paid membership to the Substack, and then you'll be supporting the podcast, getting access to all the old stuff, getting ad-free episodes and bonus episodes, and boom. Yeah. Anyway, Noreen Herzfeld is right here. It was awesome. When you get done listening, go get her book, The Artifice of Intelligence. You won't be disappointed. Smoochy boochies, friends. All right. Well, hello, everyone. This is Tripp, and Noreen Herzfeld is here as part of our AI series, and I'm pretty excited about this. I've had multiple mutual friends say we were going to have a lot of fun when we end up getting to talk. So you come with great recommendations.
Well, that's good to hear.
So I think a place to begin will be for you to share a bit about your kind of vocational journey as a kind of interdisciplinary scholar. You didn't start out wanting to write and wrestle with AI, religion, and such. So give us an idea of who you are and the kinds of questions and different academic disciplines that brought you into this kind of scholarship.
I started my academic career in computer science here at St. John's University in Minnesota. And I got tenure in the computer science department, and I was all set to head off on my first sabbatical. And I was thinking about looking for interesting questions for a sabbatical project. I had been teaching a course on AI, and I had a question in my mind that I felt nobody had really addressed. This was back in the 80s. Okay, so there were people like John Searle and Hubert Dreyfus, philosophers, who were asking the question, can we make a human like AGI, essentially? And my question was, whether we can or not, why do we want to? Because it seemed to me that computers were their most useful when they did the things that we can't do well. In other words, when they weren't like us, when they were complementary to us. And I could not find anything in the literature addressing that sort of question, except maybe some science fiction. So I thought, great, here's my question. Off I went on sabbatical, and I failed utterly because I came to realize this isn't a question about computer science. As a scientist, I can't answer this. This is a question about human motivations. And so it pointed me to the humanities. And I thought, okay, I need some background here beyond what I got with my bachelor's degree, in the humanities to address this question. And as I kept bouncing the question around in different permutations, finally I found myself thinking, so we're trying to create the computer in our own image. And then I thought, whoa, where have I heard that language before? This is Genesis 1, you know? And that put a new spin on the question, because then I started thinking, oh no, that's really interesting. So we think we were created in God's image, and we're trying to create the computer in our image. Are those images at all the same? And I decided, well, I need to learn a little bit of theology if I'm going to tackle that question. Fortunately, St. John's has a graduate program in theology. As a faculty member, I could sit in on one class every semester for free, and I started doing that. And I fell in love. I got caught. I got
Mm-hmm.
the theology bug. Uh, so I finished up a master's degree here, and then they were kind enough to give me a 2 year leave of absence, and I headed off to Berkeley and the Graduate Theological Union. And the advantage with the Graduate Theological Union, of course, is its proximity to UC Berkeley, where Dreyfus and Searle and all those guys were. So I got to go there. I tackled my question, and it became my first book in our image. artificial intelligence and the human spirit. And what I found was that both theologians and computer scientists followed exactly the same path of development. In other words, they started by thinking that the image was related to reason or intelligence in a kind of an abstract way. And, pretty soon we found out that that really had its limitations with computers, that we couldn't capture human thinking in an abstract symbol system. And, at a certain point, it actually took the theologians centuries to get there. The computer scientists got there a lot faster. But theologians started too questioning whether it was our intelligence or our rationality that was how we imaged God, because we use our rationality in good and bad ways. And so then I found that in both fields they moved to a functional view and said, no, it's the biblical scholars right around the turn of the 20th century decided, no, it's more functional. We are God's hands on earth. They were looking at how image was used by other people, other writers at the time of the priestly writer. Well, that's what happened in AI too. It moved towards saying, okay, let's just make computers do stuff. Roombas and Mars rovers and things like that. But then we're still dissatisfied with that. That's not nearly enough. And the moral theologians started saying, well, wait a minute. There are people who aren't all that functional, right? But they're still in God's image somehow. So maybe we need to find a different way of looking at this. And so the systematic theologians ended up saying, no, it's really all about relationship. And from a Christian perspective, this actually makes a lot of sense, because if we believe in a triune God, we believe in a God that is a relationship. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, the love between them. And so they said, no, really, it's all about relationship. And that's the point where I think we've gotten with computers as well. If you think about like the chatbots that are out there today, it's really about the computer being a relational partner to us. So it's interesting, but both fields made the same journey and have ended up in the same place.
When you think of those parallel journeys, as a computer scientist, like what were the kinds of research questions you asked early on in your career, and how did you see them change as you get to more functional kinds of questions, and then thinking of more relational or embodied forms of questions?
Well, that was my own journey as well, because I began in mathematics and then moved into computer science. And I was very much on the symbolic logic side of it all. And I loved those fields precisely because they managed not to get involved in all the messy human questions. Because human beings are messy, you know? And so when I was young, I just thought, what, but math is cut and dried. It's right or it's wrong. You either proved it or you didn't prove it. Same thing with computer science. The program either runs or it doesn't. It's all very straightforward, very black and white. And I like that. But as I was teaching in computer science, I found myself more and more getting interested in precisely the messy human questions. Questions about AI that we're asking, what is it we really want from the computer? Do we want it to be our servant or do we want it to be our partner? What how can we better interface with the computer? Where are we making big mistakes by giving the computer more authority than it actually has? And so what was interesting was, in my attempt to avoid the messy human questions, I eventually just ran into all of them and found out that, well, those are the interesting questions.
That's great. That's great. I wonder if there's a way in which your particular journey of seeing these kinds of questions that required the humanities and the theological tradition, wrestling with them. If that journey of coming to it gives you a different sensitivity to the way so many questions of late around AI have appeared. Like when you think of kind of standing in both of these different disciplines, and then in the last 3 or 4 years, the number of questions just in the public square that AI's generated is so significant. How does kind of friends on both sides of the divide of sorts help you frame questions to the heart of the matter, rather than oftentimes in our siloed disciplines we have rehearsed responses and kind of rehearsed narrowing of what the problem is to the things we already know how to solve on the tools of that particular discipline.
Yeah, well, when I first started bringing these two fields together, there was almost no one else doing that. I think Anna First and I were sort of the first ones to start asking these questions. And they weren't always well received on either side. The, you know, theologians would kind of shrug and say, well, that's a niche, corner, isn't it? But not all that important. And computer scientists, on the other hand, had an even stronger response. I had colleagues just saying to me, oh, now you've gone over to the dark side. Oh, now you're going for that warm, fluffy stuff. You're not a real scientist anymore. So yeah, early on, it wasn't too well received. Now I think everyone realizes that, whoa, wait a minute, these machines have already changed our lives greatly, and the potential is out there for them to change our lives even more. And that there are ethical questions, new ethical questions popping up, every week. We really do need people to be thinking about this. Unfortunately, there are a lot more people thinking about it. Over back in the day, I used to say, people would say, "Wow, you're really important in this field," and I'm like, you know what? I'm not a very big fish, but I'm in a really tiny pond. you know.
Yeah. One of the things that I think mystifies a lot of the conversation in the public square is humanity's relationship to technology in general. Kevin Kelly joked when he was on the podcast that when humans say technology, they tend to mean things they had to learn how to use after they were 30, because so much of it is already just natural when you're born in the world and you learn how to relate and interact.
hmm
As someone coming from these different disciplines and then thinking what the wisdom traditions themselves bring to kind of discerning our relationship with technology and not taking it as value neutral and such, how do you kind of frame that question of discernment around technology more broadly that AI is connected to?
Well, we do need to be discerning because I think when it comes to technology, we have always linked the words technology and progress. And there's just this feeling that, well, any new technology, we simply have to adopt it. We have to use it to its fullest. And of course, the developers of these technologies will always claim that they can do more than they actually can. One computer scientist at MIT used to have a sign over his desk that read, "We shall overclaim." You know, um, and it's what happens. Partly because they're working with soft money, and you have to overclaim to get those grants. But we often don't look at what could go wrong with these technologies until it starts going wrong, and then we start saying, "Whoa, what's happening to us?" How come things are changing and attitudes are changing? Computer science can't answer those questions. Those questions are questions that we have to look at the wisdom that's found in our religious traditions. And for example, if we say computers seem to be changing our relationships with each other, we have to ask, well, what makes for a good relationship? What makes an authentic relationship? I can say I have a relationship with my computer. Frankly, I talk to it. Most of us probably do. And now with Alexa and Siri, of course we do, right? But what kind of relationship is that? If I go out and I buy a sex bot and decide I want to marry it, what kind of relationship can I have with it? And what will be missing? And so it's questions in Christianity. I think the two most important areas where we bring wisdom to the table on these questions are about embodiment, because Christianity is the most embodied of all the major religious traditions, and about relationship, relationality, because of course central to Christianity is love one another and love your neighbor as yourself. And so those are two areas where Christianity tells us we've been thinking about these things for a long time. You might be interested in some of the things we've thought. And then other traditions can help in other ways. For example, some of the Eastern traditions like Buddhism can talk about being quiet, contemplation, mindfulness, what the human mind is capable of beyond our reason or our intelligence. So, yeah, the wisdom of the religious traditions is something that I think we could dig into and apply as we find these new technologies raising issues.
Well, I mean, to ask the question of one's neighbor, right? That's the kind of question that emerges when you give that relational response to the image of God in persons. I know in our image, there we go, the book, you talk about those three definitions of image, moving from kind of an attribute to a function to relationship. For those that may not, have the history of Christian thought running through their head and such, could you kind of unpack that a bit to help us see the kind of the profundity of engaging questions around AI when that particular anthropology understood, grounded in relationships, leads the way?
Well, I think I already did that when I was talking about how the two streams of image were the same.
Oh, I
But
was thinking of the figures and such that people might recognize,
uh,
because in the book you spend time in engaging different thinkers like like Niebuhr and Barth and these kinds of things,
mhm.
and a lot of times we may not recognize the gift of our religious tradition to address other questions that are in front of us until we get to know it a little more intentionally and a little deeply. Like there are tons of Barth scholars who would have never written what you wrote, right? There are tons of Niebuhr scholars that wouldn't have used like nature and the destiny of man to put forward particular questions around humans and their relationship to technology and pride. And that's what I found so compelling in both your books is the sitting within the theological tradition long enough and getting to know kind of the energy that's moving in these doctrines so that they can animate critical and faithful reflection about questions so many in the church may have, but they may not know there are resources sitting there, right on their bookshelf if they start to connect the dots.
Yeah, Niebuhr and Barth both, I think, have something very serious to say about our quest, particularly our quest for an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, a very human like intelligence. Niebuhr, in Nature and Destiny of Man, says, of all the creatures, we are the ones who can posit the infinite. We are the ones who think about transcendence and about transcending our own situation, our human situation. But he then cautions it is precisely this ability that we have to think about the transcendent, to think about the infinite, that leads us into certain sins. It leads us into hubris, into a sin of pride, into thinking, okay, we can not only think about the infinite, but we can harness it, we can capture it. We can not only think about eternal life, but we can bring it about on our own. And I think certainly today in the transhumanist movement, we're seeing people, a lot of folks in Silicon Valley who are saying, well, if I just take enough pills or do enough fasting, I'm going to live long enough that, even if I die, they can freeze my body. And then at some point, they can upload my brain to a computer and I will live forever. And I think Niebuhr gives us very strong critique against that, saying, first of all, the resurrection that Christianity promises us, eternal life, is not the same as everlasting life within this time and this place. I mean, after all, at some point the sun's going to go nova, and this place is not going to be here. So, to these transhumanists, they're just looking at more time. Whereas Niebuhr says, no, the best promise that we have for the future is that we will be taken out of time and where God stands currently outside of time. So that the resurrection is not just, well, your body comes back, you come back and you get more time. It's no, it's something entirely different outside of the arc of human history. Bart, on the other hand, provides, I think, the best that I have found description of what makes for a really good relationship while we are here in human history. And he says, well, there are four components that make up a good relationship, a truly authentic relationship. You look the other in the eye, you speak to and hear the other, you aid the other, and you do it gladly. By looking the other in the eye, he's saying you're actually seeing the other as the embodied person that they are, and as other than you, so that they are not just an extension of you or something to be manipulated by you, but that they are truly other. And this raises a question. Well, I can look you in the eye right now through all these computer screens. Is that the same as looking you in the eye if we were sitting in the same room? It's not. It's partial, okay? Because we are fully embodied creatures. I can't shake your hand, I can't actually see you in three dimensions. You're flat on my screen. With a computer, can we look a computer in the eye? Well, we could look an avatar in the eye. I suppose a robot we can look in the eye. But there are some problems. When I look you in the eye, and then suppose I see you again suppose I meet you in person at a conference after we've had this chat, I know you're going to be pretty much the same person you were that I'm talking to today. With a computer, you don't know that. They could be reprogrammed, they could be hacked. You actually don't even know. You can be speaking to an avatar you've created on a screen, but you don't know who's hearing you because your words, once they get out there, they could be going anywhere. And there have been instances. One instance that I found really illustrative here was that in, I believe it was South Korea, someone developed a chatbot. It's a program where you could design your own chatbot, and they aimed it towards widows, so that they could design a chatbot either just to be a companion to them, or even to mimic their dead partner. But there were scammers behind the program, and they were using these chatbots to elicit private information from these women and then to scam them. And eventually the government had to shut this down, and did. And many of the women said it felt like a second bereavement. That now, first they lost their partner, then they lost their AI partner. But I think this shows the danger that when you're not actually looking someone in the eye, you honestly don't know who you're talking to, and it could be a scammer. So when you go to speak to and hear the other, you have to say, well, I'd like that to be connected to looking the other in the eye, because otherwise I don't know who I'm speaking to and I don't know who is hearing me. Aid the other, well, computers aid us all the time. So that's good. There are questions about how much aid we want them to give. The philosopher Shannon Valor has worried about moral deskilling if we were to use care bots, particularly with the elderly, that we won't have the opportunity then to learn the kind of patience and tenderness and everything that it takes to take care of grandma. We just give her a robot. Then we don't have to visit all that often. Care bots are being used in some places in Asia to take care of children. But here again, there are some worries because children they mimic who they are around. They're in a very formative period of their lives. If they're spending all their time with a robot, will they become more robotic? Probably. Do we want that? Then, of course, there's the whole question of lethal autonomous weapons. These are being developed at a rapid pace. I think we've seen them deployed for the first times in Ukraine and Gaza. Do we really want our computers, our robots packing heat? How much agency do we want to give them? So, yeah, aiding the other, it's what computers are for. But there are still questions that are raised. That are there areas that we don't want them to go? Just yesterday, I saw this great meme of a woman saying, um, I want AI to do the laundry and the dishes so that I have time to write and do artwork, not AI that'll do the writing and the artwork so that I can do the laundry and the dishes, you know? So we're getting sometimes probably getting things backwards, finding that the easier things for the computer to do are the things we want to do. And some of the things we just assume, I mean, Roomba's great for vacuuming and terrorizing the cat, but it's yeah, it would be nice to have AI that would do the dishes for us. So far, we don't have that. And then, of course, you come to the last one: do it gladly. Can a computer do anything gladly? Do we want it to? This gets into the whole realm of emotion. Right now, our computer programs can recognize certain emotions in us, in when we're speaking to Alexa or Siri. Um, they can mimic emotion. They can mimic an emotional tone, a voice. An avatar can, mimic a facial expression. But do they have emotion? Do they feel it? This comes back to being embodied again. To actually have an emotion, you have to be embodied. When we feel, let's say we're going to feel fear, you're walking down an alley on a dark night, you hear footsteps behind you. You've gotten that shot of adrenaline to get ready for fight or flight long before your cerebral cortex kicks in and says, uh-oh, footsteps behind me, what do I do? Okay. When we perceive a stimulus, the first thing we get is a bodily reaction. And then we examine the two together, both the bodily reaction and the stimulus. The computer only gets the stimulus, so it doesn't have the same kind of emotion. And when you think of emotions like empathy, there are some people who aren't very good at feeling empathy, but they can fake it, and we call them sociopaths. So right now, our computers they're kind of sociopathic. Having a relationship with a computer is probably in the end, it can be charming at first, and in the end, it's going to feel about as empty as having a relationship with a sociopath.
Yeah, you raise so many different particular issues there that could often be just walked right. We could walk right by them theologically and ethically if we aren't attending to what's getting itself done in these kind of responses. when I was at the University of Edinburgh, one of the classes I taught was the science and religion half of the year that went through biology and the psychological sciences. And I think until teaching that class, I wouldn't have immediately thought I'm going to have a nightmare about care bots. But when you told me that, like both beginning of life and end of life, the care bots are actually taking out the very places that human evolution generated that deep ethical impulse that the face of the other brings us, right? That humans birth a child before they can be autonomous, and culture and community, family, society cooperates in a host of different ways to create a loving place, and that we thrive as a species when deep trust and security is established then, and that's reciprocated to the elders at the end of life. And that kind of care is not something that could be shoved aside lightly. But the thing that I find difficult to do and hard for us to wrestle with theologically is to go, but the big engine of our economic system, that like kind of naive connection between technology is always progress, the idea that more workers in their peak years could be doing their job and all these kinds of things instead of giving time for the care of infants and the care of elderly is like that logic makes perfect sense. And when none of us can opt out of the economic system we're in, even if you don't like it, the temptation's significant. The
Yeah.
same kind of temptation our students are having now about using AI on their essays and all these kinds of things. It raises this predicament where technology and the kind of unquestioned connection to it, to kind of our cultural myth of progress, doesn't ask the kinds of questions that I think if we care about the depth of humanity and care about the nature of relations and community, we would. And those opportunities to be morally formed by the care of a child and the care of elderly are essentially human. And I could imagine nightmares about all the examples you just gave. But I wonder, as someone who kind of goes between these different disciplines, how do we raise those ethical questions where it's not just can we do X, Y, and Z technologically, but should we?
Exactly. Well, I think these are questions that, you know, religious people should be raising all the time. Should we? I mean, obviously, in some ways, the Amish give us an example of a religious group that has decided that the paramount thing that they want to hold on to is relationships within the community. That's why they don't have cars. That's why they don't have telephones in their houses. They'll actually have a telephone booth in the Amish community that you can go to if you have to make a telephone call. But they said if we have them in our houses or in our pockets, you know, we're not going to go visit each other. And we're not going to look each other in the eye when we speak to and hear each other. And if we have cars, we're going to drive off here, there, and everywhere. And we're not going to really cultivate relationship within our smaller, bounded region, bounded community. So, they're not against technology. They use power tools to make their furniture and stuff like that. They're against certain technologies. No, we're not going to have a television because then people are going to stare at it and have semi relationships with the characters on the screen instead of, again, visiting each other and having real, complete relationships with each other. I think we need to be asking more questions like that as well, and not just saying, oh, well, the kid will be safe because they got Robbie the robot, or grandma will be fine because, Technophil will look after her. But to realize a full life means, as you were just saying, establishing that kind of reciprocal relationality where the parent takes care of the child who is not able to live on their own, and then eventually the child takes care of the parent when they are no longer able to live on their own. And there's a fullness, there's a depth, it's like a full circle in that relationship that could be attenuated at either end. In the middle, too, I'm concerned about de-skilling. We've seen that computers can de-skill us a lot. If we have self-driving cars, are we going to have the skill of being able to drive anymore? And the fun of it, you know? If we have, think about a worker in an Amazon warehouse. In the past, that worker might have worked in a shop, they might have owned the shop, they would have known their customers, they would have interacted, they would have had a rich relational life while they sold things. Now, they rush around in a huge warehouse, just putting things in boxes. And it's a sort of de-skilling. You think about the artistry that goes into, you know, hand making a piece of clothing or a piece of pottery, and how different that is, and how much more we value the things that we know were made by a skilled artisan than the things that were punched out by a machine or a 3D printer or something like that. So there's physical de-skilling that technology brings to us. Now we worry about moral de-skilling. That if we have these care bots, we will not learn the moral skills of looking after each other when it's needed. And there's also a sort of spiritual de-skilling that can happen. I just wrote a paper that will be published in Spiritus, the Journal of Christian Spirituality, in the fall, asking, is an AI generated icon an icon? And, Dali, Midjourney, they're pumping out icons all the time now. But is it really an icon? Is it the same as when, an icon writer actually prays? They're blessed by the church, then they pray, they contemplate the saint or Jesus or who they're going to write into their icon, and then they put layer after layer of paint on wood, going from dark to light, the same way that they believe in the Orthodox tradition that we are deified as we go through life. Our souls take on more light, more radiance, more goodness. Their job, if they're going to use the computer as a tool to make an icon, becomes something completely different. It becomes, gee, how do I come up with the right prompt so that this icon doesn't have 6 fingers on each hand and looks sort of like St. George or sort of like Jesus harrowing hell. And whoops, that first prompt didn't work. Let's try again. They're going to have to work on the terms of the machine rather than on the terms of a relationship with the saint.
Mm-hmm. So when you earlier you raised that question of, well, really Jesus' command to love our neighbor.
Mhm.
Like, is AI a neighbor, and can we love it, and or will we be able to? Right. Like, I think part of that challenge, right? Like, there are these ways it problematizes the genuine love of other human neighbors. But do you imagine us getting to a point, and what kind of shift takes place when we have created our own new neighbors that don't share our chromosomes and such?
I think it's idolatry, really. We've created something with human hands that we are now going to relate to rather than relating to God and to each other. I think there is a genuine human need built into us. It's a need that was identified by Augustine when he wrote, Lord, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. It's a need to be in relationship with someone who is not human, someone other to us. It's to be in relationship with God. But throughout history, that scared us because we don't control God. We can't control God. And we don't know God as deeply as we would like. And so we often try to find substitutes. Gods made by human hands that we can therefore control. And we can, in some sense, grow to love them, but they cannot love us back. As the psalmist says, well, they have ears, but they cannot hear. They have eyes, but they cannot see. You know, they have bodies, but they cannot move. He could have been describing robotics or avatars on a screen. And what happens then is that we give the love that we should be giving to God. We give the attention we should be giving to God. We give the love we should be giving to each other and the attention we should be giving to each other to something that isn't real, to something that actually you cannot love us back. And it's at the root of all idolatries, and this is just one more idolatry. The impetus comes from a good place. We are hardwired to be in relationships. But ultimately, if we substitute for relationships with things that are not embodied, that are not real, that do not have emotions or feelings, we're going to be disappointed in the end. And yet, we will have given all this time and attention to something that lets us down, when we could have been giving it to each other and to God.
Hmm. I mean, even that connection that you raised there in Augustine, something Niebuhr picks up, and kind of deepens the problem for the modern age, where, like, as the reality of God or the concept of God dissipates from culture, and this kind of the rise of the plausibility of a life without the transcendent, then he raises that question that's the place where humans construct idols, right? Like this
Exactly.
desire for self transcendence,
Mm.
and that kind of suspicion, cultivating that kind of critical suspicion about our relationship to technology, I think gives us a hermeneutic of sorts where technology is one of the places, and an increasingly dominant place, that our pride as a species gets expressed.
Exactly. And we think that through our technology, we can bring heaven on earth. We think that through our technology, we can maybe ultimately live forever. And none of those things will happen. And we've seen so many times that every technology that we build, it gives with one hand and it takes away with the other. Something gets lost, uh, even while we do gain something. And so technology is never going to bring us heaven on earth, and it's never going to bring us eternal life. That's why Niebuhr says, looking at all the possibilities, I still believe that the Christian view of the resurrection is the best hope for an eternal life. And one of the things, if you take a good look at Christianity, you see that everything that is central to it is about our physical embodiment and our living physical lives in a physical environment. If central to Christianity, the incarnation, God took on a human body just like ours, a fallible human body that we just as soon get rid of if we could, because, it feels pain and we know it's going to die. And he felt pain and he died so that God could have a full, 100% authentic relationship with human beings. Could know. We could say, yeah, we got a God who's been there, done that, knows what we experience. And then there is Easter and the promise of the resurrection. A lot of Christians talk as if, they were Cartesian dualists. If somebody dies and they say, oh, his soul went to heaven, he floated across that rainbow bridge or whatever. That isn't what Christianity teaches. Christianity teaches that on the last day, there will be a resurrection of the body, and we will be raised in an embodied form just as Jesus came back. And was embodied. He ate, he drank. His disciples could put their finger in his hand and the wounds were there. And then you think about the sacraments in the church. It's an embodied act. I think that's one of the reasons why, for Christianity, trying to do it all online doesn't really work. You know, you gather for communion, for the Eucharist, and you actually taste the bread and the wine physically. Baptism, they get water splashed all over you, to say you are an embodied being and you live in a certain place with certain other embodied beings, and you can't change that.
Yeah. Yeah, the moment we start to ask questions around embodiment, materiality, and the life of the church, I just remember how many debates happen the moment lockdown starts about the Eucharist
Mm-hmm.
and about worship services taking place online, and all of a sudden people pull out the 16th and 17th century Eucharist debates and those metaphysical commitments to see how it's going to work depending on your denomination.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you're getting at is a different way of framing that conversation that I'd love for you to take some time with, because I know a whole lot of church leaders, and I get emails about this quite regularly, don't know what to do when it goes to the sacraments and digital mediated worship, these kind of things. When we take seriously that relational framework that you've been developing, what kind of questions could you imagine, like the church council or elder board wanting to wrestle with before making decisions as to how we mediate the relationships between congregants, worship, Eucharist, these kinds of things?
Well, if we start with the sacraments, and probably the one we have most frequently is the Eucharist or communion, that is going to be different within different faith traditions. In the Catholic tradition, where there's the belief that at the consecration this becomes the actual body and blood of Christ, there's no substitute. In other words, if you are actually going to take in the body and the blood of Christ, it has to be the consecrated host, the consecrated wine. So you can't just sit at home and, pour a little from your own bottle and say, okay, good enough. It's a very physical thing, believing that this is actually the physical presence of Jesus' body and blood. Now, in the Lutheran and the Anglican traditions, you have, like with Luther, you've got this Christ is present over, under and through the sacraments. So it's difficult. I think this becomes more questionable. If you go to some of the other Protestant traditions, some of the Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist traditions, they would say Christ is there symbolically. If Christ is there symbolically, then probably you could say, all right, then we can do it, mediated with a screen. And of course, you get as far as the Quakers, and they say, we're not even going to do it because we believe that he meant that every meal that you sit down to is a sacrament. So you're going to find that different traditions would have more or less trouble with that. The Catholics saying impossible, The Lutherans and the Anglicans probably saying, we're not so sure. Some of the other Protestant traditions saying it's symbolic, and so we could have the symbol mediated through the technology. I think baptism, again, boy, it's hard to find a tradition that says you don't need water. However, I was just giving a paper at the European Academy of Religion annual meeting in Palermo, and I heard another paper where someone was talking about baptism actually being done via avatars on a screen. again, it's probably going to depend on the tradition. This was in a Protestant tradition, and they said, yeah, it works. A person really felt baptized, felt changed. I think as you move more towards a Catholic tradition, an Orthodox tradition, they would say no, you need the physical element to that. But I think what really gets lost, you know, I spent much of my life as a Quaker, and you could say, look, you're just sitting in silence. You can just do that at home. Why do you go to a meeting house to sit with a bunch of other people who are all silent? But it's an entirely different experience. Yes, I can sit at home in the silence, essentially meditate on my own. And it's fine. It's a good experience. There are times when I do feel connected to God. But when I'm in that room with other people, it becomes a very different experience. Just to explain, give you one example. One time when I was sitting at Quaker meeting, and I had had a fight with my boyfriend that morning, and I came to meeting, I was right, he was wrong. And I'm sitting in the silence, just sort of stewing. And you know, in the silence, I finally started saying, I got to get this anger out of me. And so I visualized the anger as like mud that I was dredging out of my heart, throwing it on a tray. And then in the vision, that mud was turned into a pot and violets started flowing out of it. And someone sitting across the room, another Quaker, said, I don't know why, but the line from the 23rd Psalm keeps coming to my mind, my cup runneth over. And I thought, yeah, when we're physically present, we are connected in some way. We do not know how that connection works. We do not know the way, but we were connected that morning. And if I sit at home, I'm not connected to other people in that same way. The whole is greater than the parts.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great story and an example. And I think when we try to wrestle around religious communities and its relationship to technology, you get a beautiful example of discernment, right, in the Quakers, and such. But one of the impacts that the church is continuing to wrestle with is just how our relationship to our congregations changed dramatically in modernity with the invention of a car, right?
Mhm.
Like the car solves a problem more efficient, faster, but now all of a sudden you're not connected walking down streets with the same people in the parish you go to, and then what religious community you attend became something you selected because you could drive more, right? And then as you're driving, you're not walking and seeing the faces of your neighbors, or even on a bus. Well, in America, we get in our own car and we drive, and we're in boxes closed off from all of our neighbors till we get to the destination that our individual autonomous self is choosing and selecting, right?
Mhm.
And that shift early on, that it wasn't until later that the consequences for it are shown. And a minute ago, you talked about the way in which AI and the kind of algorithms it's generating are really seeking after our attention. Right? There's this attention of the presence of that moment in the friends meeting, and that's a different kind of attention than the attention that we represent to an algorithm that's using its artificial intelligence to hold us there. Probably generating our fear, anger, tribal solidarity, so that we can be reminded how deficient we are, and ways that we can purchase our identity and and such. For knowing just how rapid, right, that AI cultivation of seizing our attention is growing. How do you kind of discern that theologically? Because it's hard to imagine, right, a complete opting out of uh, of using smartphones or and everything that's connected to it. But I think everyone is like consciously, increasingly aware of just how problematic digitally algorithmically wise mediator of our attention that we're carrying around.
Yeah. We don't realize it, but we're walking around with tracking devices on us at all times. And these devices demand our attention. But we have to realize all the attention that we give to them is attention that we are taking away from something else. It's attention that we're taking away from each other. As you pointed out, with cars, we don't have the completely fulsome relationships with each other that we would have had in a different time. So I work with one set of people, I go to church with a different set of people, I go to the store and I see a completely different set of people. You know, these people aren't integrated into my life. They each one is in one little part of my life. And of course, the computer takes that to a further degree. So there are certain people that you follow on X. There are certain people you are on Facebook with you. There are other people that the algorithm doesn't let you see. And those aren't the same people necessarily that you work with or go to church with. And so our relationality becomes fractured just as our attention becomes fractured. And what I find particularly sad is when I walk into a classroom nowadays. I've been teaching for 40 years. When I started teaching, I'd walk in a classroom and I would probably have to yell at least 3 times, "Okay, guys, let's get started," and finally the hubbub would die down and we could get started. Now I walk into a classroom, it's dead silence. Everybody is, looking at their phone or they've got their laptop propped up in front of them, and they're not talking to each other. They're not getting to know each other. And yet, I was very shy when I was their age, that had the devices been available, I would have dove right into them, because it was awkward to have to talk to the person that sat down in the chair next to you. Sadly, there are young people now in Japan who are actually just retreating into their rooms and staying there for a year or two and not coming out. They're doing everything online, ordering food in, and they're not experiencing embodied presence in the world, embodied presence with each other, embodied presence with nature. It's one thing to go for a walk in the woods, and it's different because it engages all of your senses, than to hop on your Peloton and maybe put, okay, I want woods ride, and see the woods on your screen. And they might have added some chirping birds or something, but you're not feeling the ground beneath your feet. You're not smelling what's around you. You're hearing a very curated bunch of sounds, not the fullness of the sound that would be there. It's a different experience. We are, embodied creatures that are meant to experience the environment around us and each other in a very physical way. Unfortunately, the more time we spend staring at a screen, and I'm guilty as charged, after a long day at work, I go home and pull up Netflix, like everybody else. But I realize that that means I am losing something. I'm losing opportunities to be with other people. I'm losing opportunities to experience the world around me as it is.
Mm-hmm. In the different elements of life you talk about that are lost the moment our activity, engagement, attention is digitally mediated. That kind of bifurcation of our existence it is interesting and generates certain ethical questions around just around surveillance, right? So the increasing surveillance of our existence, the tracking of us, the reflecting and getting to know us to give us the right ads, all that kind of stuff, all the way it gets used even more scarily in the military. That but the things that can be quantified are the ones that get surveilled.
Yeah.
And when our logic as a culturally one that is a bit infatuated with technology and our ability to control humans and nature and determinant, where that kind of the quest for self transcendence is the human horizon of sorts. I I wonder, the more power we give it, just how much more of all the things that can't be quantified about human existence dissipate.
Yeah.
And when you think of, I mean, any of the religious traditions, but like especially one that would, the incarnation, and that the world's future is in the divine life, and all these deep materiality, the desire of the divine for embodiment, and these kinds of things. I wonder how we raise the question as one of discipleship about just how much of our existence that can't be quantified is the very place where the quality of grace, exists, the where it makes us human, or a new human. Like, what does discipleship look like when we realize just what is being handed over to our tech lords of sorts these days?
Well, it's an interesting thing. You can't quantify love. That's the most important thing. And I find in so many areas, because computers deal with numbers, it is precisely what can be quantified that gets to be important. I worry about that in education right now with this move towards assessment that, we're supposed to, give the students a questionnaire at the end of every term and they can assess how useful the class was. Well, the fact is, particularly in the humanities, yeah, if I'm teaching them how to program, they can assess by the end how good of a programmer they got to be or not. But in many ways, as I think back on my education, I might remember one thing from a class that stuck in my head, or that popped back into my head 20 years later. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, I didn't get that at the time. It happened to me in writing the book I just finished. I ended up using Martin Buber's I and Thou quite a bit. Well, when I read I and Thou as a college freshman, I didn't get it at all. Had you assessed me at the end of that class and said, okay, did she understand I and Thou? Did she enjoy the class? It's like, nope, nope, nope. But it was on my bookshelf. And here it is, 40 years later, and I pull it off the shelf and go, oh my God, this is exactly what I need right now. So we don't know. You can't quantify that kind of thing. You can't quantify the one kind word that someone gave you that made you believe in yourself in that moment. You can't quantify the one thing your parents might have said that you brushed off, when you were a teenager, and that now that you're older or have children of your own, you're going, oh my gosh, yeah, I needed that. There's a lot, that we need that we can't analyze or assess at the time. So yeah, what does it mean for discipleship? It means being with each other. I think it means those four things that Bart said. It means looking each other in the eye, being physically present to one another, speaking to one another, and speaking with kindness, with grace, building the other up, not tearing the other down, as we have way too much of a tendency to do online. It means aiding the other when we might not get anything back ourselves for that aid, and it means doing it all gladly. Um, that's discipleship. That's the kind of love that we put into action with one another.
Even that distinction, right, of things that can be quantified, being the only reality we adjudicate based on, is something that showed up for the 3 years I was in Edinburgh. I was working on a project on, I was the philosopher, but on the science of consciousness. And one of the problems that exists there, and it's showing up again in different ways in AI research, is how the kind of materialist, determinist style theories of consciousness are getting problematized by different scientific results. Like twins in utero before they've developed a brain stem doing the very behavioral actions that we later attribute to human beings because they have the material ability to interact. There's a host of those issues. But the other option of having consciousness that's dominated so much of modern philosophy is like a real strict dualist one, where consciousness as a reality it gets probably inserted with a soul, or different ways of doing it. And I found what consistently gets ignored in the developing the scientific research questions is the way these inherited metaphysical pictures have already bifurcated reality. And so there's a plethora of new options, right? And thinking about consciousness, and I did a series of interviews with different scientists and philosophers working on it. And what's fascinating is they all make the same point you have, the moment they make an ethical turn, is namely that the theory they've been working with and making this progress on and such is also abstracting the human and consciousness from the enjoyment of a fresh, ripe strawberry, or being seized by a symphony, or deep love, or hurt by betrayal. Like there are these things about human existence that can't be quantified in the same way, but an account of the human without it is problematic. And I think that space that you see showing up in a lot of the places science, philosophy, religion are intersecting is the need for a new anthropology and really a new understanding of nature writ large.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the case. All those things that you mentioned, that's the essence of being human. And a lot of times those get sort of brushed aside when we think about, people who are saying that we're going to scale up large language model AIs and come up with an AGI. They're not looking at any of those things, you know. What we have right now is AI that has no internal model of the world and how it works, and no internal feelings about that world and about its place in it. So when a chatbot comes back at you with an answer to your question or relational comments, it's just words. It's just words being strung together that, the AI has been trained on seeing that these words often go together. And that's why it makes so many hallucinations, so many mistakes, because it doesn't actually have any experience of the world. When we are children, we're learning so much that we don't even know we're learning. You think about a couple of kids playing in a sandbox, and they're learning about gravity, they're learning about fluid dynamics as they pour the sand from one thing to another. They're learning about interpersonal relationships when Billy tosses sand in Susie's face. They're learning about a lot of things of how the world works. And we're not putting any of that, we're not able to put all of that into AI until we have an AI that can actually experience the world. But that takes experience, that takes knowing what that ripe strawberry tastes like. That takes sitting out in a field and seeing the blueness of the sky and watching the clouds go by and daydreaming. It takes all of that. All of that forms us into the people that we are. And right now, we haven't got a clue how to give that to a machine.
And sadly, our relationship to machines it can often keep us from giving it to our neighbor and our enemy.
Exactly.
Right. Just the way artificial intelligence is being used in and most new technologies find their first use in war, and that should be that's something Jacques Ellul makes quite an important observation about. But when a kill list is something a human didn't develop but trusted an algorithm to do, and the consequences are being morally prescribed in an algorithm. All those kinds of things like just we start outsourcing more and more of the very things that give us dignity, and you wonder what has to happen, because these to be in the know about any of these topics requires so much work, right? So be it military intelligence using algorithms to target, or the kind of research that's taking place using stem cells, or the possibility of a lab origin around COVID is a question around the limits of research and what you do. And any of those kinds of questions are ones that it's hard to think about or feel like you even have the ability to say something about without a lot of knowledge, and yet the impact of them for what happens, what our military does with our tax money, or science funding and all this kind of stuff is coming from us. And I think it's easy to feel overwhelmed and like one has no agency to direct the ship we're on because it's up there handing out grants and bombs based on what's been quantified. And I don't know what to do with that, but I do know. I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do a series like this and hear from people in different disciplines and such, because so often we know our agency to shape our life ends way before the things that are on our horizon and that we're fearful of. And when you feel like you're in a web of relations that are responsible for outcomes like that, take how it's used in war, it's hard for that not to be an ethical question. But then you go, I don't even know enough to think about how to decide about it at all. And that to me is an increasingly frequent experience for those of us called to love our neighbor and our enemy, is that our awareness of the problematic questions outruns any agency we have to respond to it.
Yeah, that's true. But we can't just sit back and say, okay, I don't have any agency, it's up to others. Because we still have a certain amount of agency. In this country, we can still vote for our leaders. A lot of people don't. I don't know why not. It's the one way in which we can make a difference. We can speak out. We can speak up. We can call out the lies when we see them online. We can ourselves, as I say, try to build people up, not tear them down. We can look at our own behavior. I think we can make our own decisions about the technology. It's interesting. I teach a course on doing ministry in a technological world. And one of the first things I ask the students to do is to go on a technology fast. Most of them find it impossible.
Do you
And
actually get them all to do it?
no, I
Okay, because I
don't.
tried once and I got faces that were just like, "You want me to what?"
Yeah, some of them do it, and they're kind of amazed by what happens. Some of them, I had one young man who said, "Oh yeah, this is going to be easy." Came back the next week and said, "Well, that was impossible." He said, but what he realized was that he was checking his phone 160 times a day, and he was like, he had no idea that he was doing that. I said, no, that's, statistics show that most people are checking their phone, numerous times in the hour until they go to sleep. So, it gave a bit of a wake up call, I think, to some people to realize how very dependent they had become on the technology, and how it might be getting in the way of their relationships with others, even though it presents itself as a facilitator of relationships. So, you think about Zuckerberg when he made Facebook, he was like, I just want to connect people, But then you look at how it's turned out and say, oh, yeah, and really disconnect people too, really divide people. So I think each of us can make decisions. None of us, one of the problems, I'm also teaching eco-theology and was talking to someone a few days ago who was saying, you know, one of the problems is that we are all suffering moral injury because we can't get out of the society that we have built for ourselves. So if you think in terms of climate change, we are all participants. We drive cars, we ride in cars, even if we don't drive, we heat our houses probably with fossil fuels. There's no way to be able to say, okay, I'm clean, I am not contributing to the warming of the environment. And so it's a moral injury. And it's not the kind of moral injury like I shot someone in a war and now I'm home and I did something in the past. It's an ongoing moral injury where we say, you know what? I'm still doing it and I can't stop doing it. And I think it's the same with some of our computer technology that, we might say, gee, I'd like to just a journal in here, put out a book, 10 reasons to get off all social media. And you can read it and you can go, yep, check, check, yep, he's right, yep, yep. But then are you going to do it? Well, you might gain some things, but I'll lose touch with my nieces, and my second cousins. And so I say, well, no, I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to try not to check it every day. If I check it once or twice a week, I can find out what the nieces are up to and the second cousins. And I can turn off notifications so it's not pinging me every time to say, hey, John just posted something. So there are things we can do, but we have to admit that no, we cannot. But isn't that what our fact is? We live in a fallen world, Isn't that what original sin is all about? It's that we are caught in this web of a fallen world, and we will find ourselves numerous times and in numerous situations in our life being damned if we do and damned if we don't. And good, you get to choose, but it ain't black and white, it's dark gray and dark gray. That's part of human condition that has been recognized in almost every religious tradition to say, yep, that's the world we live in. You do your best, and as Martin Luther said, sometimes you sin boldly, but you trust in God more boldly still. And I think as long as we trust in a God who knows our condition, who knows our fallibility, who knows that we can, dream of perfection in our minds, but we can never reach it. And that's okay because we have a God who will forgive us over and over and over again.
Yeah. All right. I have one more question. That was a very sermonic conclusion, but I would be sad if I didn't ask it. As someone that gets to have these conversations with students, are there any particular films or pieces of fiction that when they watch the film, or TV series, or or read the text, that generate fun conversations, like where the gift of the story allows a different kind of way of asking the questions than when they're dealing with it more directly and thinking about the technology and the Christian tradition and such.
Yeah, I find that the film, The Social Dilemma, generates a lot of thoughtful conversation with my students. It certainly gets to the manipulation, the surveillance, and the how caught we are emotionally, with our technologies and in the system, particularly of social media. that's been developed. And then the other piece that we either read or watch the movie is Frankenstein. You know, it's long. Mary Shelley wrote that long before computers were even dreamt of, but she was recognizing this Janus face of technology, that we go into it with the best of intentions and often get the worst of results, and that we often can be irresponsible in how we go into it if we don't do it together, if we don't have checks and balances on the technology that we're building, and that this desire to create in our own image, this ultimately idolatrous desire, is going to lead us astray. It's not going to have the outcome that we think it will. So I find that having them read Frankenstein or watch the Kevin Branagh, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is pretty close to the book all the way until the end, it really gets them thinking about technology writ large.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And you mentioned a book you recently finished, so what should people be looking for on the horizon?
Well, there's going to be more stuff coming out of the Vatican, so particularly for Catholics, but I think for everyone. Keep your eye on the Vatican. AI is on their radar, and stuff is being written. The Dicastery of Culture and Education just came out with a book in March, and there's more to come.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like when it goes to a number of these kind of transnational questions that the species needs to act, Pope Francis has been on the frontier of pressing both questions around the ecological crisis, and the way our economic system is impacting the least of these. So,
And
uh,
we didn't even get to talk about how AI impacts the environment, but it's big.
oh well, if that was what I call a lure to a follow up conversation.
Well,
So,
yeah. People don't realize because we think, oh gosh, it all happens in the cloud. Like this is all very clean technology. It's not a clean technology at all. Everything that happens on computers, it's happening in these massive server farms
mm-hmm,
that are gobbling up tons of energy. One of Microsoft's newest server farms in Washington State uses the energy of 40,000 homes. We don't
wow.
think about that. If you ask ChatGPT a simple question, you just want an answer. When did Hannah Arendt publish the Eichmann in Jerusalem? You're using 10 times as much energy for ChatGPT to answer that question as if you just Google it.
Mm-hmm,
Because Google will look it up in a database, but ChatGPT, it has to formulate its answer every time. And that doesn't even take into consideration the huge amounts of energy that are used to train these. Why is OpenAI asking for billions of dollars? What are they going to spend those billions on? Energy
mm-hmm.
to train these machines. So, as long as things like cryptocurrency, things like AI, large language models, are niche things, used by a small subset of people, uh, okay, it's not great, but okay. But when you start saying, as the people in Silicon Valley are dreaming of scaling this up so that everyone is using it, we don't have that kind of energy to be able to do that. And in the short term, we're just going to make our climate crisis far, far worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, you might say, yeah, the Pope's thinking about climate, he's thinking about AI. He's also thinking about how these two come together, and they do.
Yeah. Wow. Now that is a parting shot. What that's going to keep a few of us up
Yeah, it
thinking
keeps
about
me
it.
up at night, especially as I read now about 126 Fahrenheit in New Delhi,
Hmm.
and I'm thinking, oh gosh, and then we've got, these tech bros in Silicon Valley who are saying, we're just going to keep scaling this up, scale it up, scale it up. And they're not thinking at all about the fact, because again, we were positing that this is somehow all happening in a mental space,
Right.
and we're positing that somehow we can keep reaching for that infinite that Niebuhr warned us about. And we're forgetting, no, we are physical creatures on a physical planet that we're busy trashing, and it's going to bite us back if we don't wake up to that fact. It's the
Yeah.
incarnation, damn it. This was the favorite phrase of one of the monks here at St. John's, Father Godfrey Deekman, who participated in the Vatican II reform. And he used to just bang on the table and say, it's the incarnation, damn it. And he was absolutely right.
That's awesome. What would Jesus do? Google it. Don't use don't use AI. Oh, but that difference in energy use is profound. Definitely not a part of their marketing material.
No, not at all.